everybody, Roll at the Logbook.com, back for more Infinite Sheep. We keep herding the sheep, they keep coming back for more. Herding with a D, that could be mistaken badly. This is something from the Green Bay days at WACY, which was the UPN station in Green Bay, which was a station that hired me away from the Ferris Broadcasting stations in Fort Smith in the summer of 97. In fact, I distinctly remember that the phone call that was basically, pack your stuff, move to Green Bay, you've got a job waiting for you up here. That phone call happened on my 25th birthday. So there was, kind of a panic. It's like, oh, wait a minute, how much does it cost to move? Well, the answer is it costs everything you have. But that was an exciting new adventure. Those were good times. I had Fort Smithed enough. It was time to get out of Arkansas and kind of see, shall we say, more civilized climes. And so I started work at WACY in Green Bay in August of 97. And it was both very familiar and very strange. First off, Green Bay was a jump of about 40 markets up for me. So there were some of the things that had flown at the Ferris stations would not fly here. This was expected to be a professional product. There were probably not going to be any more fitty givers on the air. Not that I didn't try to think of ways to to sneak him in. But furthermore, there had just been an affiliation swap. WACY was in the same building as WGBA, which was the NBC affiliate. But WGBA had just swapped affiliations with the Fox station. This is kind of important. What this meant was that WGBA now had a full-time, full-service network. Whereas previously, as a Fox station, Fox was, even in the mid-late 90s, even though they had tried expanding into mornings, into late nights, they'd started doing sports on the weekends, Fox was still basically a part-time network. When it came down to their primetime schedule, it was 2, maybe 3 hours a night. So WGBA, having formerly been a Fox affiliate, had stocked up on huge amounts of syndicated programming. So had WACY, because UPN in 97 was doing 2 hours a night, 3 nights a week. And then they would have a repeat of some of that programming on the weekend, an optional repeat. Otherwise, UPN was as much of a network as the Primetime Entertainment Network was at that time, and P10 was a glorified syndication package, which is to say, UPN wasn't much more than a glorified syndication package yet. So that was another station that had stocked up on enough syndicated programming to fill out the schedule. When you have all of this syndicated programming and then suddenly there's an affiliation swap and the NBC station doesn't need the syndicated programming, all the syndicated programming moved over to UPN. This had an immediate effect of suddenly there was a gigantic amount of children's programming. Daytimes on the UPN station were kind of a write-off because prior to that, you had probably what would be considered retro programming now. Old shows that have been in syndicated reruns forever. Or you had third-string talk shows. Now we had bought, or the company had bought, all of this syndicated children's programming, enough for 2 stations to program mornings and afternoons with. So suddenly WACY's entire daytime schedule, it's like they were trying to compete with PBS. It was all children's programming, which is kind of a bold move. It was also perhaps a concession that not a lot of ad sales would be happening in the daytime, because probably not a lot of ad sales had been happening in the daytime before that massive shift in programming. All of the other syndicated programming wound up in the evenings. So before I had even arrived, there was another promo writer-producer. Her name was Kim, and I was terribly fond of her. She was incredibly smart, and I had to learn a lot from her on the fly. She was in charge of the daytime children's programming, which had been given the programming block name of Wacky-32. This was WACY. Just throw a K in there. It's Wacky-32. It's all kids programming. And she created an identity around that, and that was great. I arrived after she had already set that in motion, and I was looking around like, what the hell do I do with afternoons and evenings? This is a mess. It all seems so random. And then I noticed that in the overnight hours, especially on the weekends and overnights, they had crowded all of the syndicated action hours into one place and kind of swept them under the rug. It's like, oh, please, don't anyone look at this. We don't want everyone to see that we are actually carrying 2 different Star Trek series and all of this other stuff. But for the fall of 97, they had already bought 2 part-time network stations worth of syndicated shows. It all had to go somewhere. An awful lot of it fit into vaguely a sci-fi classification. You had Hercules, you had Xena, you still had Babylon 5 hanging around for those last few episodes at the end of 97. Deep Space Nine was still going. Voyager was going into its 4th season, which meant we were about to wind up with 7 of 9. Other syndicated sci-fi shows that were starting up in the fall of 97 that we were going to be carrying. Gene Roddenberry's Earth Final Conflict, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, the series, Nightman, which was it was an attempt at a superhero show, and it couldn't have been too terrible because it lasted 2 seasons. Team Knight Rider, which was an attempt at a Knight Rider spin-off completely free of any of the trappings of the original show. It was completely new characters in the future with talking cars and motorcycles and so on, and it was almost like someone was trying to do live-action Battle of the Planets or live-action Gatchaman without licensing that. Instead, they licensed Knight Rider. I have no idea why. You had Stargate SG-1 and Poltergeist's Legacy, and Outer Limits. All 3 of those had started on Showtime. Slightly watered-down, edited versions of them without nudity or without hard swearing were now being packaged for broadcast syndication. We had all of this stuff, and it was all dumped in weekend overnights because, we had Simpsons reruns, and surely that was more popular. The thing about Green Bay as a market, especially in 97, you were fresh off of a Super Bowl win for the Packers, for one thing. And so I don't think there had ever been more of a sports mentality, especially in broadcast sales departments. Every station in that market in 1997 was looking for anything that could be claimed as a connection to the Green Bay Packers. And so, various players might wind up as hosts or guests on shows. You would have sports call-in shows, sports commentary shows, all locally produced. But it was just sports, especially on your big three network stations, but also the Fox station. UPN, no one really seemed to be worried about it. I really think at that point, they were looking at the UPN station. They were looking at WACY as a tax write-off because you couldn't sell advertising in Wacky 32 because a lot of advertising would frankly be unsuitable. And you couldn't even promote the evening programming in Wacky 32 because the evening programming might have, violence or romance or whatever. And it's like, Mom, what's that? Oh dear, not in the middle of bananas and pajamas, anything but that. It was a really challenging assignment. And I think I'd been there all of 2 weeks when I said, why are we burying all the sci-fi stuff when we could be blocking that and giving it an identity? Now, let me be clear about this. I had been hired as a promo writer-producer. I had not been hired as a program director. So I was now stepping firmly outside of my job description and kind of saying maybe the program director didn't do this right. That's going to be met with one of two reactions. Bared teeth, as in grr, or someone cocking an eyebrow and saying, okay, show your work. I suggested a schedule that would happen in the primetime hours, and I just basically said, let's build our identity around the fact that we've got all the sci-fi, all the syndicated sci-fi, on this one station. You want to watch this kind of show? It's here. It's on the UPN station. The other guys don't have it. And I also suggested kind of wrapping the UPN programming into that. Like Star Trek Voyager was part of the invasion now. It wasn't, we weren't going to program it as, we weren't going to promote it as UPN. We were promoting it as part of the UPN 32 primetime invasion. Our program director was a very patient guy named Joe Norred at the time. He listened to this and just kind of said, okay, let me make some alterations to what you're suggesting and let's kind of meet in the middle. But maybe we have something here. Now, Joe was lovely about that. I was basically telling Joe how to do his job and he was going, okay, we can try it. Because here's the thing. Otherwise, the programming was so random, there was nothing to hang your hat on. And like I said, the whole station was being treated as a tax write-down, basically. No money will be made here, but we are obligated, we are contracted, we have bought all this programming, we have to put it somewhere, or else we've wasted that money. So the answer was the primetime invasion. And when we kicked it off, you have to keep in mind, UPN station, not exactly filled to the brim with advertising. So we had a 60-second image spot and a 30-second image spot. And we started hitting this stuff really heavy once it was decided, no, we are actually doing this.
The invasion has begun. Each week, UPN 32 takes you further into the unknown. Each week, UPN 32 brings you 5 nights of action, adventure, and some serious hardware. And prime time will never be the same.
What are we dealing with?
Every week, you will witness a prime time invasion.
Everyone brace yourselves. This is going to be a rough ride.
The prime time invasion has begun on UPN 32.
Okay, first off, sorry about two things. The audio, for some reason, on whatever medium I preserved those spots with for my show reel. The audio obviously took a hit there. So too did the video, because there's a lot of Venetian blind stuff going on there. So the video seems to have gotten super duper interlaced at some point. And there's not a whole lot I can do to fix it. I mean, I could try to rebuild it, I suppose. All that stuff is on. All that stuff is out there now. Maybe I should do that for funsies if I ever run out of things to talk about. But that was the 60. Here is the much more streamlined 30, which was much more to my taste.
Please stand by. This is an invasion. This fall, UPN 32 takes you further into the unknown. This fall, primetime will never be the same. This fall, you will witness a primetime invasion. Coming soon to UPN 32.
Now, as much as I wish I could say editing those spots was my first exposure to the Avid, those were edited on tape in the backup edit bay, which you see here in all of its 1997 glory, complete with Chiron 3/4-inch decks. I think that's a Beta SP deck over there. Yeah, that's definitely Beta SP. That was all the production muscle that the UPN station rated. The NBC stuff, they got to edit on the Avid. I did not. Not yet. I did get to play on the Avid a little bit, because we also had some bumpers that we constructed that would run during the programming. It would run as legal IDs, and it was all of a piece with the promo material.
Xena, UPN 32's primetime invasion continues Thursday at 8. You're watching UPN 32's primetime invasion. Welcome to UPN 32's primetime invasion.
So it was about consistency of the image, consistency of the sound. A word about the voiceover guy we used, because he was not in-house, and that was definitely not me. His name was Bill LeMay, and he was a known quantity for local radio work, but it really busted out some movie trailer voice for that. And good on him. I remember the one time, I believe he was based out of Milwaukee, and we sent him scripts and he sent us tapes. He sent us open reel tapes. And I remember the one time he was actually in town and needed to use our facilities to record stuff. He was like this little wiry guy. He did not look like someone that big voice was going to come out of. I remember finding that faintly funny, because the package did not match the sound. So our sales department, not everyone in sales was especially enthusiastic about the primetime invasion, because especially if these were people who had been born in Green Bay, lived in Green Bay their whole lives, went to school in Green Bay, and now they were working in Green Bay. It was football. And suddenly telling them, no, we are, y'all can do the jock stuff. We've got the nerd stuff, and we need to sell the hell out of it. Some of these guys just really didn't like that idea. But we went ahead and we did it anyway, and somewhere, and I realize I am going to sound like Al Bundy bragging about that field goal kick 30 years later, but just bear with me here. Somewhere between the primetime invasion and Wacky 32, between those two things, we were suddenly one of the top 10 biggest growth stations for household ratings in the country on UPN. We grew more than Memphis. We grew more than New Orleans. We came in just behind Jackson, Tennessee. Okay, so Green Bay is probably used to being a little bit ahead of Jackson, Tennessee. But considering that we were coming from the back end of the race, and suddenly we were up here with the horses that might make it to another round, that was impressive. It was impressive enough that the UPN 32 invasion did not immediately get dismantled. It was decided, hey, okay, we're accomplishing things here. Let's expand this. And let's keep it around, keep the identity around, keep building the identity. Let's build it into weekend movie blocks. Let's build it into, this is what this station does now in the evenings. We are throwing solid nerd stuff at you. You also have to keep in mind, summer of 97, that is when the Sci-Fi Channel did not do anything but reruns until the summer of 97. So this was right at around the same time that Sci-Fi Channel was just starting to get into original programming, which original programming at that time meant we are helping to finance something that was produced in Canada. But we had all of this first-run syndication stuff in one place. And it stuck. Somehow it stuck. I threw a wild idea out there. It was very patiently and very graciously taken on board. And it survived. It popped a number. Not a bad thing to do just a few weeks into the job, gotta say.